Good afternoon. We're here with Grant Russell. This is AboutShaw, and we're doing our episode 3 of Creative Perspective. I want to say a massive thank you to Grant for welcoming to his home today with his lovely son Oscar and the beautiful dog, and also his beautiful girlfriend Amy is looking after us today. So, welcome to the podcast, Grant.
Thank you, Mark.
We're going to start off as we did with Greg Wilson on episode 1. And I want to find out a little bit more about what inspired you to become a professional musician. Like, what age did you start, and what instruments did you first pick up?
Well, I started quite young. My dad's a professional musician, jazz double bass player. So and he owned a jazz club that I grew up in. So it was very early, the influence musically. So I think I started piano lessons when I was about 6 or 7, and I started playing double bass when I was 7 or 8. So very young. So it's been something that's been part of my life, basically as long as I can remember. And it's just I was always had a knack for it. It was something that was good. As my 16-month-old son seems to have as well.
Yeah, Oscar seems to have a knack for the guitar already as well.
It was kind of something I always did. I think I kind of made a decision I was going to do it professionally when I was about 12, 13, although what I wanted to do within the realms of music has changed as I've got older and developed. But my dad was very encouraging with my music, and I was lucky to have some fantastic teachers when I was growing up. That's where it all came from originally.
That's fantastic, and you made a lot of reference to your father there. Would you say he was your inspiration or hero into music, or was he more of a muse and you had another sort of hero within the jazz scene that you grew up in?
I'd say he was the enabler. He made sure I did my practice and sort of devoted himself a lot to me being involved in a lot of musical groups, and actually went to a school that had a fantastic music department. He had to move a couple hundred miles, stuff like that. He was fantastic. Where he was my hero musically, I wouldn't say so. I actually didn't like my dad's music until I was older.
Yeah.
When I was young and doing music, I wasn't really into my dad's band, and my dad sort of an old school Dixieland jazz musician, so we call it trad. And I didn't like it. I hated jazz all through my teenage years, and it wasn't until I was 18 that I finally got a handle on it.
Yeah.
I saw what it was and absolutely loved it, although not so much my dad's style of music. Now I look at my dad's stuff and I appreciate how good his band was, especially in the 70s. His band were fantastic. I'd say I had other influences musically, other than my dad, sort of direct to my creative side, I would say.
No, that's fantastic, and it's actually quite strange. Like, my relationship with my father in music was very minimal, so much to my mum's distress, my dad once brought home a tin whistle to try and get me into music, and even I couldn't master the tin whistle at the ripe old age of 3 or 4 years old. And I think when I went to primary school, there was not really anything in place in Manchester for people who weren't already playing an instrument or had a parent who was playing an instrument. But luckily in high school, the music service in Manchester was very strong. So you're aware of Chris O'Neill and Ryan O'Neill of Rough Trade. They came from the Manchester music service scene, as well as other musicians. I can imagine people like Bugsy Malone, UK garage artist. He will have gone through the UK education system, and that Manchester Music Service, as it was called at the time, was very well funded in the late 90s, early 90s, but I feel
less so
now, and I think it's damaging the UK's ability to creatively output. But
I think the state of music education. I've got a lot of people I know work in the education system, particularly in music, and it really is a tragedy how neglected it is, because I think musical education makes a huge difference in so many ways. I mean, not just in making good musicians, but in terms of all the things that studying music gives you. I don't think there's any other subject that gives you a grounding in language, mathematics, social skills,
I agree.
sense of time, playing an instrument, finesse, dexterity, listening, patience, dedication.
Open-mindedness as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I remember when I was at Burnage High School, we had a fantastic music teacher there called Mr. Mercer, and he went above and beyond to ensure that you didn't just learn about the modern era of rock and blues, but it was about world music.
Sure, yeah. History, geography.
That's
it.
It's
all in
it's
music.
all in music.
Yeah.
Fantastic, and it's great to see, as a Mancunian, your London perspective on that. Was the London education service for music any better then, you reckon, than it is now?
I was extremely lucky having a parent who was a professional musician, and really he knew how to nurture it, and so I was very lucky that I was given opportunities with teachers and with playing with county orchestras and national orchestras and stuff when I was younger. Gave me a fantastic training, and it's a shame that because of some benefits I had in growing up that was available to me, and I know it's not available to everyone, which is a great shame, because I'm sure there's thousands of very talented musicians out there who don't get the same opportunity to.
And there'll be children in schools now that may never see an instrument until high school when it comes part of the curriculum. I remember when I was younger, I was part of a choir. My foster brother Joe, he was a fantastic guitarist and bass player, and he got invited to then play with inter-school bands and stuff. And that's actually how I met Chris O'Neill, and when Joe Maguire was playing bass for the Starlight Express musical at St. Peter's High School. So Joe, who was at a different high school, Burnage, was spotted by his music teacher, who was conducting the music for Starlight Express. So what is unknown is how unknowingly music brings people together, how it's a culture for bringing people together regardless of the genre.
And across classes, nations, and everything. Every musician I know that I work with, they're all fantastic guys. And I get on with all of them, and there's not obnoxious one of them. They're great people, but they're from all different walks of life. Some of them private school. I've got some of them come from practically nothing or broken homes or whatever. Yet we all just come together, and there's no feeling of any divide between any of us, and I've done gigs in other countries where this is especially good with jazz music, where there is a sort of global universal language within it, and the sort of tunes, the standards as we call them. But I've been in other countries where I can't speak their language, they can't speak English, but we play together on a gig, and I've ended up spending the whole night with them, partying and staying over and hanging out, and it's great that the music allows that.
It's like global. It's almost like a global language, isn't it?
Music? Well, it is. Music is a universal language. The laws of physics, which determine how harmony works and how we perceive and feel melody. That's the same in the universe throughout. So it's something we can all relate to and all understand.
Super. So we're going to move on to our second theme, which is about overcoming creative blocks. Now, I'm not a creative as you are. I'm more of a visual creative personally. I do a little bit of DJing myself, but have you ever come across a point in your life, or has there been any situation where you've come across a creative block, and do you have any sort of coping mechanisms or strategies to kind of rattle yourself out of them?
Again, with my work, because I'm essentially a hired session musician. I don't have a lot of time to have a creative block that would affect me. When I get booked for a gig, I've just got to go and play it. But a lot of my stuff is I'm playing other people's music, or playing what's written down in front of me. So it's not always I have such a creative element. I have had, when I've been involved with projects where it is about writing original music, which I wish I'd done more of. But when I have done it, I have found that there are points when you can get very, very frustrated with wanting something to happen but not knowing how to do it. And yeah, I've done it very difficult. And there's times, you know, in terms of practicing my own music, that I've got very frustrated with myself, and almost to the point where you want to give up, you know. And I wouldn't know what to recommend, really. I mean, I've worked through it, you know, just, you know, if you're working on something and it's just not happening, don't overdo it. I think that's the worst thing you can do. Sometimes you just walk away and take a break. And then always just trust yourself that it's just a temporary thing, and that if you keep on trying and you keep the dedication, that it will eventually it will come out.
Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry, that's my boy.
That's all right. So yeah, well, we've both kind of seen the creative process. Again, I reference back to Rough Trade, and they've released their first album, and they're working on their second. And I believe you've just released your first album. Is that right?
I have, yeah. Well, yeah, first thing under my name, yeah.
Well, that's good. And how did you find that process of actually kind of plucking up the courage to say, I am an artist and I'm going to self-produce? How did you find that process?
Yeah, I mean, no, the process itself was quite easy for me. It was something I should have done a lot sooner, but I'm very lucky that there's some fantastic musicians, other session musicians working in Manchester that I know, and I'm very grateful to say, agreed to do my quartet. And they're of such a high standard. Luke Flowers on drums, who does cinematic orchestra. And
I think I know Luke Flowers. His father was a drummer as well, wasn't he?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
And then George King on piano and Karen Matthews on saxophone. They're so good, those guys, that they make it so easy. You know, we didn't really need much rehearsal. You know, we've been doing gigs for a few years, but the actual recording itself went very smoothly, and an amazing sound engineer called Tony Draper, who I can't speak highly enough about. So yeah, that process was fine. The thing I find difficult with it is all trying to promote it and get it out there. I find that very, very difficult. That's the part. The playing side and the recording, no problem.
The creative part is sometimes the easiest, but having the confidence, or even trying to find the energy to produce yourself, I think, is the hardest. So I recently wrote
a whole world by itself as well.
That's it. The actual production of something is its own thing.
Yeah.
Hey, so we're going to move on to our...
Oh, it's the Grant Russell Quartet, by the way.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the Grant Russell Quartet. You can check that out on all platforms.
All the platforms. Yeah.
Hey, so jazz is a very unique landscape for music. So when we look at other genres such as reggae or rock of the 90s, they all have a relatively similar sound, but how in jazz do you make yourself unique, if that makes sense?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. You'd think with something that you know is at its very heart is, you know, has so much improvisation, that actually quite easy, but actually it because there's been so much, you know, it's very easy for jazz to become quite derivative. I can't say that word. And it can start sounding like an affectation in itself. I have a slight issue with how jazz is now taught in a lot of music colleges and music conservatoires, because it is taught similar to how classical music is taught, and I think it slightly misses the point that what makes jazz and you know, great jazz musicians great is their unique sound, what they did, you know. And if you're just sort of reproducing what they did, whether it be their sound or the notes they use, you know, the licks or whatever, obviously that has its use for developing yourself as a musician, as an improviser. But it can become like you're just paraphrasing other musicians in an art form where that's missing the point. You know, it should be unique. So it's that balance between paying respect to what's come before, but also finding your own voice, finding your own way
Mm-hmm.
of communicating what you have to say, how you feel about the music. I think it's about being honest. You know, the best jazz musicians and the best jazz players play with a real sincerity, and integrity. And I think that matters more than anything. You know, as much as technique and understanding theory and whatever. That matters. You know, say what you want to say, not what you think should. You know, like you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and as a genre, I feel like jazz itself is quite conceptual, quite similar to world music. So it's like I don't see many other genres where the concept of the music is quite like it is. For myself, I did a lot of world music when I was in my teens, like samba and a lot of call and response stuff. But that call and response style of music, and even in jazz, they use a bit of call and response. It actually incites playfulness within music, doesn't it? And then further innovation. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah. No, and the best kind of jazz has that enjoyment about it. You know what I mean? Again, I think when a lot of jazz musicians get it wrong when they're very, very serious and maybe listen to Louis Armstrong, for example. You know, it's all about having a great time, and you can hear just listening to him play trumpet. You know, makes you smile, and I think that's an important thing that you know is a great element of jazz music. You know, when you consider where it comes from and you know what African Americans who developed the music first of all had to deal with, that enjoyment about it is a very brave statement, and I think it's important that anyone now exploring that music and that genre and that way of approaching music should keep in mind. You know,
yeah,
it's supposed
definitely.
to be fun.
It's supposed to be fun and playful. Yeah, I agree. I'm going to take you a little bit of the sidestep. So my knowledge of jazz isn't great, but where I have seen it on the public stage is through the Mighty Boosh.
Oh yeah.
And so obviously
Julian Barrett, he's
Barrett
good,
is a very talented artist and thespian and writer. How do you, as a professional jazz musician, feel when you see your genre almost caricatured in that way?
Oh, the Mighty Boosh, I loved it. I actually love the spirit. The spirit of jazz is one of the best characters I've ever seen in anything ever. I don't know a jazz musician who doesn't absolutely love it. I mean, no, there's no problem at all because they did take the mick out of it a bit, but at the same time, you could tell it was coming from a place of
love.
Yeah, love and of knowledge of what it's like and a bit of a piss take about it. So no, I wish there was more. You know, I wish they bring back the Mighty Boosh.
That's it, yeah. I just thought I'd put that in there because I remember shortly before this interview, I think I shared Mighty Boosh reel on our Instagram. So we're going to have a little jaunt into now what you think about the future of music. So when we look at the boring stuff, the charts, it seems to be largely dominated by American artists at the moment, with the occasional UK or European band coming in. When we see up and coming bands that we know who are playing very good music, so we've got people like the Blossoms from Stockport, and again, I do mention him probably too much on my podcast. Rough Trade is like,
that's right.
They're
bloody good.
Yeah. How do we see a future of music for these artists that are creating very innovative new sounds? The Blossoms have got a very unique sound. So have Rough Trade. It's like, what do you think the music industry needs to do to support that evolution of new artists?
The thing that worries me about the mainstream music industry is that they don't really care about that anymore. You know, it feels like I might be getting a bit controversial here.
That's okay.
It feels like the marketing people took over music once the Beatles came along. And they saw what could be done with it. They gained the power, and now they have all of it. And these days, I would say it's impossible to imagine about a Led Zeppelin, a Pink Floyd, or a Beatles, or even more recently a Radiohead making it through to the mainstream anymore, because it's so geared towards demographics and meeting marketing needs, which is not. Which I know people who work in marketing might disagree with me, but it's not a creative act. You know, great music takes risks. It's different. You need to have people in charge of that mainstream who are willing to do that, and I just don't see, or I don't hear it in any music. I mean, I listen to pop music now, and I'm not going to, you know, be, you know, I'm high and mighty and say I think it's terrible. I just think it's very, very dull, and it's very self-orientated. It doesn't speak of anything grander than just the person itself, and musically. When I do have to play it, when I'm doing gigs, when I'm playing pop music, it's very, very simple. And I don't feel like it's simple because they've decided to make it simple. It's simple because that's all they have in their locker to do. And it makes it, a lot of it, extremely two-dimensional. And very, very dull. And it just feels like that's how the whole music industry now is geared. And I worry bands like Rough Trade, as you say, the Blossoms, I'm sure there's thousands of fantastic bands out there, but the idea of them getting into the charts, if that's even a thing anymore, I just don't see where that's coming from, and I think it's very, very depressing, sad. There needs to be an enormous overhaul of how music is produced in the mainstream and how we consume it.
I think another thing as well is that, as we've mentioned earlier in the podcast, is that there was once a thriving music service which supported schools in providing music to children. Yeah. But I think in the evolving education system is that children at high school level need to be almost taught the art of commercialising their art. So your partner Amy's a beautiful materials crafter, and people aren't taught of how their creative passions can actually become very thriving businesses and supporting of the economy. Do you think that in a modern era of music tuition that you should actually be taught a little bit of theory around the business of music? Because one of the failings I see in some young bands is they don't understand that they need to be part of the PRS, the Performers' Rights Society, as well as there's another one, the Songwriters Society, so that they get the money for their plays. Because I've heard Rough Trade on the radio, and having spoken to the team, it's like, are you getting paid? And they're like,
I've been trying to get Ryan to sign up to PRS for about 2 years now.
Yeah.
I keep getting more annoyed at him. No, you're right. I think it's a little bit sad that for me, for example, when I studied, I did a classical degree in double bass, and it was fantastic in a way that it was so focused on that performance side of double bass, which, if you want to be a top of the world, you know, classical player, which I'm not, but you know, I gave it a go. But then it is absolute dedication, and it's so much work, you know, and that's great. But I also bemoan that I went into being a freelance musician without any kind of knowledge of these different ways, PRS, you know, and you know, things, how to put yourself out there and all that. I think at rock courses and stuff now, they do that quite a lot. And so, yes, it is important. I wish it wasn't. You know, I wish you could just focus on the actual creative element, making music, and other people could deal with all that other side, you know, the marketing and so forth. But the world as it is, yes, it's very important. I think any young musicians definitely need to have a great, good idea of how to use social media, how to register their works, and hear this, that, and all these other things.
See, I think it would be like, it's almost a very short sort of chapter to learn, because once you learn about the sort of the PRS, the songwriters, and also the Actors Guild, so I mean, kind of like, it could almost be like a combined sort of lesson between drama and music, to say, if you're going to be a creative, you need to understand how to properly commercialise your art. But I think it's something that we're definitely missing. We're going to go heading towards the last sector, which is going to be words of wisdom, because we may have some listeners who were previous musicians or previous artists or creatives. What sort of words of wisdom would you have for anyone who is given up an instrument and they've gone to the 9 to 5.
Right. Yeah.
What could you say today that would inspire them to get back on that instrument?
What can I say to inspire them to get back on the instrument? I mean, I love it, you know, and I couldn't live without it, and I imagine that people who have played and given up do miss it, and it's always there, you know. If you've got some training, you know, it's kind of like riding the bike, you can get back on it. I'd say as well, you know, like that music, you know, touches everyone of different, you know, of all different places and everything. I mean, I have a story. Do I have time?
You got plenty of time, yeah.
Just so this is, you know, something when I remember this happened at a period when I was actually feeling quite down about being a musician. It was just after COVID, you know, obviously ridiculous. I didn't work 15 months, but I was doing a gig in Liverpool, and I turned up my gig with a double bass, not feeling great, not looking forward to it. And there was a little girl, a 4-year-old, I think, 3 or 4-year-old, stood in the door. And I had to get past her. I said, "Can you open the door?" And she opened the door, but she was fascinated with the double bass. She came up when I was packing it, and she was there, and I said, "Oh, this is the E string, this is the A string." And then Colin Lamont, who's a fantastic drummer in Liverpool, he was showing her the drums and all that. So anyway, then the keyboard player turned up, Paul Kilvington, as I remember. And if those of you who don't know jazz, if it's me, Colin Lamont, and Paul Kilvington, it isn't just an easy listening gig. It's a full-on hard bop jazz gig. And we started playing, and this little girl stood in front of us for the whole set. Was absolutely transfixed. Like I've never known someone listen to it so much. And she was shouting, and Colin had to keep on going around his drum kit and stop her from hearing the cymbals. Anyway, we're playing, and there's a group of women with her, and we're having a bit of banter with them. Anyway, we finished the set, and we go. We're at the bar, me and Colin. And one of the women came over and said, "Hi guys, I just want to thank you." It said, "We're not her parents, we're social services, and we've rescued her 2 weeks ago. She was being abused by her father, and he's looking for her, and we're hiding her in a hotel." And she said, in the 2 weeks we've had her, she hasn't spoken to anyone, but she was talking to us that night and asking about the thing. And I was very
touching,
yeah, very much so. And Colin, who's one of the toughest men I know, was like, well, you know, and as was I. But and then we were playing the second set. I remember we were playing "Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars," a Brazilian tune by Jobim. And this little girl came and stood in front of us and went, I'd mentioned to her earlier she could get a small double bass. And she looked at me and went, I'm going now, but I'm going to come back and you bring me a little double bass. And then Colin gave her some sticks. She went, I've never seen her, but that was, you know, a very important lesson there where, you know, we were playing, you know, really quite progressive jazz stuff, but that some people would say, oh, you have to understand music to know it, you know, rubbish. This little girl
just shows that it's like part of our pattern.
Absolutely loved it, and it moved her so much and really helped her out of a bad time. And it wasn't like wittingly in her, she was just being completely honest about it. So I'd say to people who want to get back into music, you know, what other field art is there where you could do that, where you could communicate to someone in that way, you know, and to someone at such a different stage in their life and going through something I don't understand, you know, but that moved her, and I feel privileged that I'm able to work in a medium that can do that.
That's amazing. So I want to say thank you, Grant.
No,
I think you've been immensely wise in what you shared with us today.
Finally.
I'll thank Amy for letting us use the living room today, and thank Oscar for playing us some music along the way. You've been listening to AboutShaw, and this is episode 3 of Creative Perspective. And stay tuned, there should be another one out in a week's time. Thank you.